Poor Maid was secretly pregnant with the Korean CEO's twins until he found out. Jessica Anderson pressed her ear against the mahogany door of Min Jun Park's study, her heart pounding as she heard the Korean CEO's voice rising in anger. "Mother, I don't care about the Kim family's business connections. I won't marry someone I don't love." Mrs. Park's sharp reply cut through the air like a blade. "You will marry Yoona Kim tomorrow, or you'll lose everything your father built. The board is already questioning your leadership." Jessica stepped back from the door, realizing she was witnessing the moment that would force her to make an impossible choice. For months, she had been living a double life in this mansion, hiding feelings that could destroy her job and secrets that could ruin the Park family's reputation forever. Tomorrow's engagement party would change everything, but Min Jun had no idea that his quiet housemaid held the power to either save him from a loveless marriage or destroy his family's empire completely. The decision she made in the next 30 seconds would determine whether 3 lives would be torn apart or transformed forever. 8 months earlier, Jessica had arrived at the Park estate in Beverly Hills with nothing but a worn suitcase and desperate hope. She had grown up in Queens, sharing a cramped apartment with her mother and younger brother, watching her mom work double shifts at a diner just to keep them housed. The mansion sprawled across 3 acres, a monument to the Park family's technology empire that had conquered both Seoul and Silicon Valley. This live-in housekeeper position represented salvation, a chance to send money home to finally help her family survive. Min Jun Park barely noticed her during those first weeks. The 32-year-old CEO moved through his home like a ghost, arriving late, leaving early. Consumed by Park Technology's expansion into artificial intelligence. Jessica observed him from the margins, this man whose tailored suits probably cost more than her annual salary, whose phone calls switched effortlessly between Korean and English, whose rare smiles never quite reached his exhausted eyes. She cleaned his study while he worked through the night, removing coffee cups he didn't remember drinking, straightening papers he barely acknowledged. Min Jun's world consisted of board meetings, investor calls, and the crushing pressure of maintaining his father's legacy while proving himself worthy to his formidable mother, Grace Park, who scrutinized every decision with the sharp precision of someone who had built an empire from nothing. The household staff whispered about Min Jun's isolation, about the arranged marriage his mother was planning with the daughter of a Seoul banking family, about the loneliness that emanated from a man who seemed to have everything except genuine human connection. Jessica kept her head down, worked efficiently, remained invisible. She couldn't afford complications. But invisibility proved impossible to maintain. One evening, Jessica found Min Jun collapsed at his desk, papers scattered across the floor, his breathing shallow. Panic overrode protocol. She checked his pulse, loosened his tie, called for help. The doctor diagnosed exhaustion and stress, prescribed rest that everyone knew Min Jun would ignore. For the first time, Min Jun truly saw her, not as the silent presence who maintained his environment, but as the young woman who had acted without hesitation when he needed help. He learned her name. He started acknowledging her presence with small nods, brief words of thanks that felt monumental in their simple humanity. Jessica tried to rebuild her walls, to retreat into professional distance, but something had shifted. Min Jun began appearing in the kitchen late at night, when Jessica prepared meals for the next day. Their conversations started tentatively, growing gradually more personal. He asked about her family, her dreams beyond housekeeping. She discovered that beneath his cold exterior lived someone achingly lonely, trapped by expectations, yearning for connection, but terrified of vulnerability. The night everything changed arrived without warning. Min Jun's engagement had been officially announced by his mother to the board, though he hadn't yet met Yoona Kim in person. The arrangement had been finalized through lawyers and family negotiations, a business transaction dressed in the language of marriage. Jessica found him on the terrace at midnight, staring at the glittering lights of Los Angeles, his shoulders rigid with tension. She brought him tea, intending to leave quickly, but his raw vulnerability stopped her. They talked for hours. Min Jun confessed his suffocation, his fear of becoming a transaction rather than a person, his desperate wish for something real in a life constructed entirely of obligations. Jessica shared her own struggles, her guilt about leaving her family, her dreams of education she couldn't afford, her loneliness in a city that felt both magical and impossibly distant. The connection between them hummed with intensity, with recognition, with the dangerous attraction of two people who saw each other's hidden selves. When Minjun kissed her, Jessica knew she should stop, should remember the impossible distance between their worlds, should protect herself from inevitable heartbreak. But for one night, she allowed herself to forget reality, to exist in a moment where nothing mattered except the connection that felt more genuine than anything either had experienced. Morning brought crushing reality. Minjun retreated immediately, his expression shuttered, his manner coldly professional. He didn't mention what happened, neither did Jessica. They moved around each other like strangers, the night existing only as an unspoken ghost between them. The engagement proceeded according to Grace Park's meticulous schedule. Jessica watched the preparations from the margins, her heart breaking, her shame absolute. She should have quit immediately, but she needed the salary, needed the housing, couldn't afford pride when her family depended on her. She became even more invisible, even more efficient, disappeared so thoroughly that Minjun could maintain his carefully constructed denial. Then came the morning sickness, the exhaustion, the missed period, the terror of recognition. Jessica bought pregnancy tests with trembling hands, took them in a pharmacy bathroom, stared at the positive results with numb disbelief. Twins. The clinic confirmed it. She was carrying twins, and the father was her employer, a man about to marry someone else whose world existed in a stratosphere she could never reach. Telling him felt impossible. His engagement, his family's reputation, his business empire would all be damaged by this scandal. Jessica made a desperate decision. She would hide the pregnancy as long as possible, save every penny, and disappear before anyone discovered the truth. She bought looser uniforms, worked even harder to prove her indispensability, avoided any situation where Minjun might notice the subtle changes in her body. Months passed in agonizing secrecy. Jessica's body betrayed her with growing evidence, but the voluminous housekeeper uniform concealed most changes. She moved carefully, avoided heavy lifting, made excuses about dietary preferences that explained her altered eating habits. The engagement moved forward like clockwork. Minjun met Yoona Kim exactly 3 times before their wedding date was set. Grace orchestrated every detail with military precision, transforming the estate into a stage for the social event of the season. Jessica watched the preparations with growing dread, knowing her time was running out. At 6 months pregnant, Jessica drafted her resignation letter. She had saved enough for a bus ticket back to Queens, for a few months of survival while figuring out single motherhood in her family's tiny apartment. She planned to leave the day after the engagement party, to disappear without explanation, to become another invisible person who had briefly passed through the Park family's privileged world. That brought her to this moment, standing outside Minjun's study, listening to him fight with his mother about a marriage neither of them knew was built on an even more complicated foundation. Jessica's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, feeling the subtle movements of the twins she had been hiding. The engagement party was tomorrow. Her resignation was written. Her bus ticket was purchased. But hearing Minjun's pain, his desperate plea for freedom, made her question everything. She had the power to tell the truth, to reveal the pregnancy that would shatter the engagement and possibly destroy the Park family's reputation. Or she could remain silent, disappear as planned, and let Minjun marry Yoona without ever knowing he was already a father. Jessica made her decision. She knocked on the study door. The conversation inside stopped abruptly. Grace Park's voice called out sharply, annoyed at the interruption. Jessica pushed open the door, her heart hammering, her hands trembling. Minjun and his mother both turned to look at her, surprise evident on both faces. Grace's expression shifted to irritation. "Jessica, we're in the middle of a private family discussion. Whatever cleaning needs to be done can wait." But Jessica didn't leave. She stepped fully into the room, closed the door behind her, and spoke words that would change everything. "Mr. Park, Mrs. Park, I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant, with twins, and Minjun is the father." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Grace's face went white, then red, cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Minjun stared at Jessica as if seeing a ghost, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Grace found her voice first, and it was deadly cold. "What did you just say?" Jessica met the older woman's eyes, refusing to look away despite the terror coursing through her. "I'm 6 months pregnant with Minjun's children. It happened 8 months ago, one night before the engagement was announced. I've been hiding it because I knew it would cause problems, but I can't let him marry someone else without knowing the truth." Minjun finally moved, standing abruptly from his chair. 6 months? You've been pregnant for 6 months and didn't tell me?" The hurt in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. Jessica felt tears burning her eyes, but forced herself to stay composed. "I didn't know what to do. You were engaged. Your family's reputation was on the line. I thought disappearing would be easier for everyone." Grace laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Easier? You think destroying my son's engagement the night before the party, humiliating the Kim family, and creating the biggest scandal in Korean-American business circles is easier?" Minjun held up his hand, silencing his mother. He walked toward Jessica slowly, his eyes searching her face. "Is this real? You're really pregnant with my children?" Jessica nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Minjun reached out hesitantly, his hand hovering near her stomach. "May I?" Jessica nodded again, and Minjun's palm pressed gently against the curve she had been hiding for months. The moment his hand made contact, one of the twins kicked, hard enough that Minjun jerked back in surprise. Then wonder transformed his expression, erasing the shock and confusion. "That's my baby," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Those are my babies." He looked up at Jessica, and she saw tears tracking down his face. "Why didn't you tell me? We could have figured this out together." Grace's voice shattered the moment. "Figured it out. There's nothing to figure out. This is a disaster. The engagement party is tomorrow. 500 guests. Business partners from 3 countries. The Kim family is flying in tonight." Minjun's expression hardened as he turned to face his mother. "Don't talk about Jessica that way. This isn't her fault. It's mine. I should have been honest about my feelings instead of going along with an arrangement I never wanted." Grace moved to her desk, her movements sharp and precise. "Fine. Here's what will happen. We'll pay Miss Anderson to disappear. She'll sign an NDA, move somewhere far from California, and raise the children quietly. You'll marry Yuna as planned, and no one will ever know about this." Jessica felt the words like physical blows. Minjun's response was immediate and firm. "No, that's not happening. These are my children, and Jessica is not a problem to be paid off. I'm calling off the engagement." Grace's control finally cracked. "You'll do no such thing. I've spent 2 years negotiating this alliance. Your father would be ashamed of your selfishness." Minjun's voice was quiet, but carried absolute conviction. "My father would tell me to take responsibility for my actions and be honest about what I want. I don't love Yuna Kim. I barely know her. But I care about Jessica. I have for months, and I was too much of a coward to admit it. That ends now." The Kim family arrived 2 hours later, and Minjun faced them with the truth. To everyone's surprise, Yuna herself admitted relief, confessing she had been planning to end the engagement as well, trapped by the same obligation that had imprisoned Minjun. Her grace in accepting the situation diffused much of the potential scandal. Though her parents departed with cold disappointment, Grace remained rigid throughout, watching her carefully constructed plans crumble. After the Kims departed, Grace finally addressed her son directly. "I hope she's worth it." Minjun met his mother's eyes with newfound strength. "They are. And Mother, you haven't lost everything. You've just lost control of my personal life. Park Technologies will be fine. Maybe, if you can accept that I need to live my own truth, our family will be stronger for it." The next months transformed everything. Minjun converted part of the mansion into a nursery, ignoring his mother's cold disapproval. Jessica moved from the servants' quarters into the main house, their relationship acknowledged openly despite the scandal. Grace remained distant, attending board meetings but avoiding family dinners, unable to accept what she viewed as her son's catastrophic choice. Jessica gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, in early morning light that turned the hospital room golden. Min-jun held his children with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by love he hadn't known existed. The first person he called was his mother. Grace arrived at the hospital an hour later, her expression carefully neutral. She stood at the nursery window, staring at her grandchildren through the glass. Grace finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "They're beautiful." Min-jun stood beside her, relief evident in his posture. "They are. And they need their grandmother. Jessica and I need you too, Mother." Grace turned to look at her son, really seeing him perhaps for the first time in years. She saw not the CEO she had molded, but her child, happy in ways he had never been while following her prescribed path. "I don't know how to accept that you chose so differently than I planned, but I don't want to lose you or my grandchildren." Min-jun hugged his mother, the first genuine embrace between them in years. "You're not losing us. We're just redefining what family means." Grace nodded slowly, then asked to meet Jessica. The conversation was stilted, awkward, but it was a beginning. Grace held her grandson for the first time, and something in her expression softened, ancient barriers beginning to crack. 6 months later, the Park mansion had transformed. Baby toys scattered across expensive carpets. Laughter echoed through halls that had known only quiet efficiency. Jessica had enrolled in business courses online, pursuing the education she had always dreamed of, supported fully by Min-jun. Grace had gradually thawed, her visits becoming more frequent, her relationship with Jessica evolving from cold tolerance to cautious respect. The turning point in Grace's transformation came unexpectedly. Jessica had been studying for a business ethics exam when Grace arrived for her weekly visit with the twins. Instead of immediately going to the nursery, Grace paused at the dining table, where Jessica's textbooks and notes were spread out. She picked up one of Jessica's essays, reading it silently. When she finished, Grace looked at Jessica with something that might have been surprise or perhaps recognition. "You wrote about corporate responsibility and authentic leadership," Grace said quietly. "You argued that businesses built on genuine values outlast those built purely on strategic alliances." Jessica nodded, uncertain where this was going. Grace set the paper down carefully. "You're right. I spent decades building empires through calculated moves, strategic marriages, perfect alliances, but I never built what you and Min-jun are building, something real." Grace sat down across from Jessica, a gesture of equality that felt monumental. "I owe you an apology. I saw you as a threat to everything I'd constructed, but you saved my son from a life of misery. You gave him the courage to be authentic, and that's made him a better leader than I ever was." Jessica reached across the table, touching Grace's hand gently. "You built the foundation that made all of this possible. Min-jun learned strength from you, even if he had to learn authenticity somewhere else." From that day forward, Grace became not just a grandmother, but a mentor. She began teaching Jessica about the business world, sharing decades of knowledge, helping her navigate the complexities of corporate culture. Jessica discovered she had a natural talent for understanding market dynamics and ethical business practices. Grace, in turn, learned to value emotional intelligence as much as strategic thinking, watching how Jessica's empathy strengthened rather than weakened her decision-making. Min-jun had proven himself as both CEO and father, balancing business demands with genuine presence in his children's lives. Park Technologies thrived under his leadership, his authenticity earning respect that his mother's calculated approach never could. The scandal had faded, replaced by admiration for a man who chose responsibility and honesty over convenience. Jessica stood in the nursery one evening, holding her daughter while Min-jun rocked their son. She thought about the girl from Queens who had arrived with nothing, terrified and desperate. That girl had found not just financial security, but genuine love, family, and purpose. The journey had been terrifying, filled with impossible choices and devastating revelations. But standing here watching Min-jun sing softly to their son, while their daughter dozed against her shoulder, Jessica understood that courage had always been choosing truth over comfort, love over fear, authenticity over the safety of hiding. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reveal the secret you've been carrying alone. Sometimes the greatest transformation comes from having the courage to disrupt everything and trust that honesty, no matter how painful, builds foundations stronger than any carefully constructed lie. Jessica and Min-jun had learned that family isn't just about bloodlines or social status, but about choosing each other every day, about building something real from the wreckage of what everyone expected them to be. If you love this story of courage, transformation, and choosing love over obligation, subscribe to K-Drama Tales for more emotional journeys that will touch your heart. Hit that subscribe button and join our family of viewers who believe in the power of authentic love to transform lives. New stories every week that will make you believe in second chances and the courage to choose happiness over expectation.